Greetings and welcome to the Quantum Ogre Cast, the topical TTRPG podcast you were destined to encounter, no matter what choices you made. I am your Elder Goblin host, Jorban, and I'm joined today by a sensible Ogier guest, Peter from Tales from Elsewhere. How you doing, Peter?
I am doing great tonight. I'm really happy to be here. It's been a long time coming, you and I hanging out.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this one. We've been chatting a lot in Discord and, like hanging out in the similar spaces, but like haven't really sat down to just have a real conversation yet.
Yeah, we don't live close enough to each other to actually
No.
sit down and share a drink and chat. That'd be a couple thousand miles probably, but this is much better than just text-based conversations.
Well, next time I'm in that area, for sure, we're going to grab a beer.
Yeah. Hey, if you can make it to Gen Con this year, I'm going to try to go.
Oh, that one is on my bucket list for sure.
Like, I've never been.
Yeah. It's huge from what I understand.
Yeah.
I've only been to like small / I just went to Page, which is like a medium-sized con. I wouldn't say it's big, but
yeah,
it might be next year. Who knows? But okay, so like for this podcast, I'm going to start you off with your rapid-fire real-life character sheet questionnaire. So this is not a character you've played. This is Peter's character sheet. So you ready?
Ready.
Okay, so first question. Your alignment.
I am neutral good.
Neutral good, okay. The non-human ancestry that you relate most to.
Dwarf.
Dwarf. All right. We've gotten mostly halflings so far. So yeah, glad to hear dwarf. I'm right there with you. I think I'm a dwarf. I get stubborn about random things, and that feels very dwarf.
I like the dwarven sense of history, family history, legacy, tradition. Yes. I like all of that quite a bit.
And being crafty. Yep. Dwarves are crafty.
They like a good meal and a good drink.
I'm right there with you. Okay, you're in a dungeon. A monster chases you into a room. You see a weapon rack. What are you grabbing?
A spear. The greatest weapon ever conceived by man.
Yes. You can back that up on history.com.
Yeah. Well, and a spear is great if you don't have any real combat skills in real life, like me.
Yes.
Things like a bow are actually quite hard to use effectively. So is a sword without hurting yourself. A spear, pointy end that direction, keeps you away from the bad guy. Easy stuff.
Yeah, and here's your historical segue, because most of the time they were hiring like farmers and everyday people, so they'd hand them spears. Yep. All right, so dump stat.
Constitution. I have
that's so funny.
Yeah, I have various I have like a deformed rib cage that it reduces my maximum lung capacity. Like I'm fine. Oof. I just can't be an astronaut or a scuba diver. So I'm not running any marathons, or it's like I have asthma, but like a little bit more extreme than that. So yeah, it's got to be con.
Man, yeah, I'm right there with you. Maybe not the rib thing, but definitely con is my dump.
I put it all into the mental stats,
Yeah, for sure. All right, so here's a fun one. If you could choose one cantrip to cast in real life, what would you choose?
Prestidigitation, no contest. Too useful. Clean anything, right? That alone would be amazing.
So quick.
I have stayed up at night, unable to sleep, and think, boy, my day would have been so much better if I just had prestidigitation, because I had to clean the toilets today and the shower. And prestidigitation, I just waved my little wand, cleaned. Incredible. Reheat my coffee or my cup of tea, amazing.
That does sound pretty handy. Not spare the dying, whatever all these people in the hospital.
I mean,
no, I'm just kidding.
I don't encounter.
I had to hit you with the guilt trip of it. Sorry.
No. Well, spare the dying, even in the more recent editions, doesn't even help somebody who's dead. Right? Fair. Like it doesn't even bring them back.
Nope.
Yeah, modern medicine.
And it doesn't guarantee. It doesn't guarantee you're going to pull them out of that condition either. So that's
exactly.
Yeah, I just wanted to hit you.
The correct answer is spare the dying.
All right, last one. You're at Fantasy Starbucks. What's your coffee order?
Oh, so I'm going to be really milk toast here. Just something with some cinnamon in it. That's all I need. I love cinnamon. Okay. I have a very narrow taste. If it has cinnamon, I'm on board. But not pumpkin spice cinnamon, just to be clear. That's just more about the sugar than the actual cinnamon flavor. That's just pumped full of sugar. So there's nothing even fancy about it. I just want some clean water that they made it with and a little bit of cinnamon in it.
Hey, that's fair. I have a player who's like every character they've ever had, whenever they go to the bar scene, they always order a warm milk.
That's great.
Which I think is so funny, because everyone's like, give me an ale, you know, strongest thing you got. And then it's like, I'll take a warm milk. And everyone just kind of looks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, granted, if I were in a fantasy setting that doesn't necessarily have access to clean water, I would go with something that has been fermented because it's safer to drink. But that's again, I just can't help but think
Hmm.
about like simulation and history and all that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's your own sort of awareness of what you're entering into there. But yeah,
Yeah, I
I
get way
get.
too much into that, of course. Like I'll argue with people about where they put the outhouse outside of the building because like, no, you would never put that there. That's too close to the river and it's downstream from, anyway.
Well, cool. I'm super excited to have you here. If you haven't seen Peter's channel, it's Tales from Elsewhere, and he's also writing a game with the same name, and you should definitely check it out. And so today, our main topic that we're going to try to hit and stick to is objectives outside of HP and creating stakes outside of violence. But we'll start things off with a little lighter topic, and then we'll segue into that at some point. So, sound cool?
Yeah.
Well, I know you've been working on your game a lot. Yeah, I even popped in that chat last night for a minute. But how's that going, by the way?
It's going well. The phase I would put the game at is all all of the alpha testing, all of that is done. The public facing playtest documents are roughly where I'd want them to be. And so now it's time to make the final manuscript. There was a beta manuscript that was 200 pages, like a full rule book. I had it printed and everything for internal playtesting. And, whole deal. You could run that as a complete game. Then I started doing public playtesting and creating public facing documents, and I learned a lot about what would make a better looking rulebook. So now the step I'm on is taking all of the updates and notes and corrections and putting them into InDesign rather than like a Google Doc and Word,
Yeah,
right? Like
right.
actually putting them together now for in preparation for a final product. So it's a lot of rewriting things that I think, why did I write it that way 2 years ago? And
Yeah, you got to make it
aggregating it
fit.
all. Yeah, got to
Yeah.
aggregate it all, and it's looking to be current estimate is about 350 pages is what I'm guessing the full
Okay.
rule book is going to be. So it's going to be it's about the size of like the D&D 2024 books, which
Yeah,
are
that's a
380.
hefty boy.
It's a hefty boy. It'll have, it's not going to have, you don't have to buy 3 books to play the game though. It'll just be 1 book.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I'm hoping yeah, so I'm hoping it won't be too bad. It'll have everything you need in that book. I want to have lots of great GM tools in it, so that people who haven't run action horror games have some guidance as to how you'd even go about doing that, as it's often very different from traditional way you'd run a traditional fight or a traditional sequence of scenarios in a tabletop role playing game. Yada yada yada.
Yeah. No, it's funny. We were talking about that, the 3-piece book series earlier in the Discord. Like that's
Right.
how, it's increasingly it's just like one big book, right? If you're
Yeah.
not following the sort of D&D model with whatever monster manual, DMG kind of a thing. And I feel like that is the way to go. You can just package your whole idea to whoever, your audience,
Mhm.
whatever. And you're not, asking them to buy 3 books
Yeah.
out of the gate
Well,
before
and
you even know if you like a game.
exactly. To be able to play it, you'd need a lot of
Right.
books, and really, so I tend to buy the D&D products when they come out usually because I'm still part of a regular D&D group. I don't really run D&D much these days. It doesn't get my creative juices going quite as much from a system standpoint. But the monster manual that they release, it's like 300 monsters or something insane,
Oh
right?
yeah,
It's
I
just a
think it's
huge
500 chapter
500. Oh, it's
levels.
just a staggering amount of monsters. But as I thought back through the 25 years of D&D books that I have, I realized like so many of them aren't all that interesting and I haven't even ever used them. And I
Yeah.
think I was kind of mentioning this when we were talking in your Discord earlier, is that it's because it's more of like a taxonomical list
Mm,
of creatures from a fairly omniscient narrator point of view.
yeah.
And that makes them a blank slate, which can be useful if you're homebrewing stories, but it also doesn't evoke a lot to me for a specific way to use that creature, or it doesn't give me like a narrative behind it. So my goal
Right.
is to have, at least in my game, something more like 60 monsters or threats is what I'd call them, because it's like we were talking about. It's not just creatures
Not
or like
beasts.
beasts. There could be people that are threats, like bandits and so forth. But that
Yeah,
each
absolutely.
one would have, I'm thinking a 2-page spread facing pages with stats on one side, maybe some art, but then really robust narrative guidance for how to use them, maybe a random table or two for things you can modify about them, right? Like how would you use them in a fight? Just really
Oh
make it
yeah.
like it's like a manual on how to use them. And I think that
Yeah.
I'm hoping that will be a useful thing for new GMs, that they can crack it open to the Kentucky Sawbones entry, this really bizarre creature, and it'll explain how the mechanics are meant to be used in a fight, how you can build up toward them, et cetera, et cetera. So that's my aim.
No, I really love that model. Actually, that's really similar to the way the Dragonbane monster manual is. I forget the name of
Oh,
it.
I've never flipped through that.
Yeah, it's got like, almost like here's some story beat ideas, like a couple bullet points sort of
Mm.
thing. Like here's a way to inject the lore of this monster in your game. Then here's like a random table, which this is getting into the paint a little bit here, but that game has like a random roll table that decides what the monster does and how it acts. And
Oh,
then
right. I have heard of that.
yeah, and then the rest of the kind of stat block on the other page with some art and that sort of thing. So yeah,
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I've
Like a
grown to
script for them to
really
behave, right?
yeah. I've grown to really appreciate that model because it's just so much more useful to you as a GM and like so much more creatively engaging, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And even if you don't have like a random, like their actions are determined randomly, building in how they're supposed to use all the numbers and features on their stat block is really nice. Like, just thinking one of my own creatures, the Blood Oiler, it says right in the stat block for its Sawblade arm, it uses this on players' limbs. That's what it
Mm.
goes for, right? It wants to chop people's limbs off. It says it right there in the entry for the damage, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so if you're reading through, okay, oh, that's a nasty looking attack, and it says they favor doing this with it. So there's no, you're not trying to figure out what the narrative
No
is supposed to
guesswork.
be. Yeah, you're not having to guess what the designer intended for that monster to do. I think that's
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that. Removing the guesswork is such an easy on ramp for like newer GMs, or especially if you're new to like a world setting, lore, whatever.
Yeah.
Like I don't know what a Kentucky Sawbone is, but that sounds awesome.
Yeah, yeah. I like, this is also getting maybe ahead of myself conversation wise as we meander, but I really like folklore approaches to monster
Mm,
design rather than, like I said, taxonomical or scientific approach. So I like when the monster, from a GM and a player perspective, has some ambiguity in it. There's what people
yeah.
believe is the case for the origins of a creature, maybe,
Oh yeah.
but it's not like such and such, the god of the dwarves cursed this one dwarven hero, and now that dwarf, like, it's all hard coded. It'd be
Yeah.
more like some people believe that the Kentucky Sawbones comes about after a battle when many people have had to have their limbs amputated during the fight. Others believe something, give you a little bit of wiggle room there, but that's what people would believe, right, about this horrifying creature.
Yeah. What it reminds me of, I don't know if you've like ever read any of the Witcher novels or anything, but like they have this really interesting approach to, sort of tall tales and stuff like that. And in their books or in that setting, often people get it completely wrong. They're like,
Yeah,
"Oh, it's going to be this kind of monster," kind of a feeling when you're reading it. You're like, "Oh, I know what this is. It's a werewolf." But then they totally like get a detail wrong, throw you off, and it ends up he's fighting like a striga or whatever the
right,
thing's called.
exactly, exactly. I love that kind of stuff. It's immerses the players a little bit more in the story and means that even if the players flipped through the monster manual, flipped through that section, they don't know everything. They'll, sure, maybe if they committed to memory all the stats, right, all
Yeah.
the numbers, but how to go about even permanently killing some of these eldritch horrors is left purposely ambiguous in some cases for the GM to decide how they want that to play out in their story, even if it all fits within the narrative structure of that setting, right? My post-apocalyptic Weird West setting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that kind of reminds me, like, I don't know if you've adopted this sort of mindset, but I've gotten in the habit of like, especially if I'm playing a sort of like D&D style game where, like you said, everybody's kind of peeked through the monster manual. They kind of know all the monsters. There are really no surprises left. So what I've started to do is like I've gotten in the habit of just describing the monster, like what it looks like, you know, what it's
Hmm.
doing, instead of just saying like there are four goblins in the field, then
Right.
I just say you see these like big-headed, pointy-eared, razor-fanged, green-skinned
Yeah.
creatures crawl out of holes in the ground, and you're like, "Whoa, what are these?"
Yeah, that's great. I like to start not just well, I tend to make any game I run slightly horror adjacent just because that's what I like to do. But I use sound a lot.
Mm.
The characters often hear things before they see them because
Oh,
that
that's cool.
cue is much harder for them to tie down. They hear
Yeah.
scratching in the walls. What the heck is that? It could be anything, right? And then they'll start to jump to conclusions, right? In a playtest session I just ran, the players encountered some zombies. And one of the players had knowledge of the unholy, so they would know. And they said, "What made these zombies? Can I figure it out?" And I said, "Well, it could be any number of things that made these zombies. It could have been a science experiment. It could have been a curse. It could have been this other unholy creature, right? You don't know what else is here that may have made them. You have a list of things that could have, but even that isn't certain to them, which I like for tension building and all that."
Well, we poked around the name of your RPG here for quite a minute. If you want to,
Oh, sure.
let's go ahead and plug it because we'll probably use this part of
Yeah.
this segment, and
I can't
we
help
got you
myself to
on here.
talk about it, I suppose.
No, I mean
Yeah.
it's exciting. I would too.
Yeah. So the brand, as it were, is Tales from Elsewhere, and so it is a series of action horror tabletop role playing games. And the first setting for that series is Clockworld. It is post-apocalyptic Weird West. We're starting with that because I like those series of words. I love westerns. I love horror, post-apocalyptic. I love all these things, and so that's where we're starting.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm right there with you. Actually, we've, off mic, we've geeked out a bit about Hunt Showdown and even
Yes.
played a game or two together. And yeah, there's something about this like liminal space in between fantasy and sort of like the age of invention that I really like, where you start to get clockwork things and just like
Yeah.
steampunk, but not like quite as advanced as maybe some other settings. But yeah, it
Right.
feels like Tales from Elsewhere sits perfectly in that.
Absolutely. And all the games, all the settings that I'm going to be writing are all going to deal with, in one way or another, the idea of the frontier. What
Mm.
that frontier is obviously different in some cases. The idea that there's an area, even maybe it was explored, but now post apocalypse, maybe it's not. But pushing out into some frontier has always been really evocative to me. It's also why I like Star Trek.
Oh
That's a
yeah,
different
same.
form of a frontier that one is exploring. And I just really like that. So whether it would be medieval or Western or sci-fi, I like the idea of a hostile frontier that has things you may want, things you may need from it, and venturing out into it is dangerous.
No, I'm right there with you. It's actually like part of what was so attractive to me about a West Marches style game is this like insinuation that you are living at one of the last bastions of society and that
Mm-hmm.
everything outside the walls is unknown, It's
Yeah,
all a frontier.
I
And
love it.
or like a game like Numenera where it's like this is a world built on the bones of several collapsed worlds,
Yeah,
several apocalypses. So you really like even things like technology that you find, old relics that you dig up are so foreign to you they might as well be magic.
right. Yeah, it's
Those
a
sort of
moldy world,
attitudes.
right? It's a world that's been covered over a few times now.
Yeah,
And that's
exactly.
always great. Oh yeah, it's so fun both as a player and as a GM to have those big open blank slates there where the players don't know what they're going to discover because it's not a well mapped world, right? Super
Yeah,
fun.
absolutely. And I feel like it opens up the door to so many like alternative styles of play, right? Like I,
Hmm.
I ran a game actually last night where the players crashed on an island. It's a strange island. It's got kind of like how do I put this? Like Journey to the Center of the Earth, maybe a little Indiana Jones vibes to it, stuff like
Dig it.
that. And the first thing that happens is they run into like a Neanderthal type human. And so the first thought is like, what do we do here? Is this person even capable of language, right? Like,
Right.
do we, they approached it so differently than if I just said like, there's a, aggressive looking cultist sitting outside of a cave kind of a thing.
Right. Right.
So, I think this might actually be a really good segue into a topic that we mentioned talking about, which is creating stakes outside of violence. So
Yes.
this was one of them. I sent you a list of things. We had a couple that we both liked, like objectives outside of HP, stakes outside of violence. Thought maybe we'd riff on these ideas for a minute because I find both of those really fascinating. Like, I did a review kind of recently on my channel of a game called Crown and Skull, And one of the things that drew me to that game, which I found so fascinating, was the attrition system.
Right.
I just thought this is like such an interesting departure. Like, even if I realize for some people this probably won't land because like hit points are such a core mechanic to most role playing games that saying like instead of losing hit points, you lose skills, abilities, or even like your equipment just gets crossed off. But just, that idea of like attacking the character sheet in another way than just a bag of hit points.
Absolutely. And what Crown and Skull does is it taps into what I would say the original use case of hit points was.
Mm,
When it comes to tabletop role-playing games, the idea was, if we go back to very early, stages of D&D, is that this was the dungeon's attrition with you. How deep can you go is really limited by your hit points, and you get worn down over time.
yeah.
You have to use up your torches and your lanterns and your hit points. It's part of it is designed to create attrition long term. And Crown and Skull is doing that same thing, right? It is the dungeon, so to speak, right? The adventure is draining your resources slowly, not instantly and dramatically, right? It's not like
Right.
you get, your head blown off immediately by a fireball or something, but it is you're slowly being worn down to the point where you have to make that decision. Do we press on or retreat? And
Yeah.
that's what hit points I think are effective for. They're a slowly depleting meter, but they aren't as good for when you start being able to recover them very quickly, say
Right.
after every fight, or healing to full every day, whatever kind of time scale you want. They start to lose that concept of attrition, and some games move that into, say, like D&D's hit dice is a new type of attrition. But with magical healing, you can often heal up quite a bit, etc., etc. But I like what Crown and Skull did because you feel that attrition really
Yeah.
palpably. When you cross off that skill, you just think, oh no, I'm now less prepared for the next room in the dungeon, so to speak. I'm not
Yeah.
just
Like,
down 10 hit points, right?
right. I got my muscle skill crossed off. So now I'm not like busting open any doors. I'm not,
Yeah,
bending the bars, so to speak, or like using, brute force for anything. I've got to
yeah.
wait until we get that back.
And you can flavor that. Maybe it was like your tendons got slashed on your arm, and just you can't
Yeah.
apply as much brute force anymore, or just something, right? You can have some fun justifying that as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I love that wiggle room with it too, like you're saying narratively. Like you can hand it over to the player and say, like, why can't you use that muscle skill anymore, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's cool.
Yeah, I had a game last night. This kind of reminded me of we were running Shadow Dark, which is, pretty traditional in a lot of senses.
Mhm.
But we had a fight and it was a fight on a cliffside and that player's character she rolled a nat 1 on her attack roll and so I was like the only thing she was trying to do is sort of like stab the ground where this creature was crawling up, the cave wall towards them. And so I was like, it's a nat 1. I have to do sort of a fumble.
Yeah, got to
And
do something.
the thing that made the most sense was you drop your sword. You're stabbing
Classic.
the ground and it falls over the cliffside. And let me tell you, that was so much more impactful than any amount of damage she could have taken in that scene. Like losing your one weapon on on this strange island you've been marooned on, and it just falling into the jungle. It was just such an impactful moment. Everyone at the table sort of breath caught, and they
Yeah.
were like, "Oh no!"
Yeah, that's great. Those
So
kind of
yeah, that
moments are really interesting. The I have a funny counter, like a bad example of this happening in a game.
sure,
So
yeah.
I'm in a Dark Sun D&D game, and I thoroughly
Oh,
enjoy
fun.
it. Thoroughly enjoy it. And in that setting, metal weapons are fairly scarce. So basically, anything made of metal is basically a magic weapon. So people
Right,
have
yeah.
weapons made of bone, and spears are just like hardened wooden tipped, all that kind of stuff. And there was a character that had a primitive bow, the ranger. He in one dungeon he went through 3 bows because on a natural 1 a primitive weapon snaps. It breaks.
Yeah.
And so we are just joking with him like, you are chewing through bows tonight. And it stopped being narratively interesting because the DM simply had it as a hard rule that natural 1s break the weapon. And so it no
Hmm.
longer became in the moment them dropping their sword down the side was right. That's a cool moment that you got to create. So the flip
Right.
side is if players just have it like as a matter of course that things just remove their gear in a game in which the more you attack, the more likely you are to get a 1. uh, you know.
Yeah, I'm always hesitant to create those like hard and fast
Hmm.
rules. I prefer to look at things on a case by case basis because, like, with that sword example I just did, where she just happened to be on the
Yeah.
edge of a cliff, she just happened to say she's stabbing the ground with her sword, trying to like, knock some rocks loose and drop it on these creatures who were scaling the wall, and so it was just like, yeah, this is the only thing that really makes sense,
Yeah, no, and that's great
rather
because
than
because she brought herself to the edge there.
yeah,
It was the
quite literally.
result of being risky. In a game like Shadow Dark, dancing near cliffs
Yeah.
carries with it some amount of danger. And I like when players know they're getting into something risky
Hmm.
and you're upfront about that because then you could be even more deadly in your consequences. The more this is kind of getting into how you can design like scenes that threaten things other than maybe just hit points is where you reveal to them how risky what they're doing is and it becomes almost a devil's bargain. Yeah,
Yeah.
you can try that, but you think that your sword will snap if you fail. Then like,
Yes.
do we risk it?
Yeah, and I love the way you put that, the devil's bargain. I played a little bit of Blades in the Dark, which it's actually a
Right.
mechanic in that game, and with the incentive that you tell the player what the stakes are, which I always say, like, if something's going to be like a live or die kind of situation, I will always tell you. I won't say like, oh, let's see what happens, and then say you fall into the lava pit and you're just
Right.
dead. Usually I like to present those kinds of cases, but it can really depend on in the moment, like we're saying, like if there's a scene and it's just like, yeah, this is probably what's going to happen. It is usually better to give that player the agency to decide, like, maybe stabbing at the edge of this cliff is a bad idea because I don't want to lose this weapon. But in that
Yeah.
case, I didn't do it. Full disclosure,
Oh yeah,
it
yeah.
just made too much sense in the moment. I was like, oh, it is a 1, and like they were fine with it, but man, it definitely will be a memorable moment
Yeah,
in the
that's great.
campaign.
When you can always tempt them with, yeah, that work. You could probably do that safely, but here's maybe a more dramatic result you could go for. But
Yeah,
if you fail, then a more dramatic failure. Those are always just kind of fun moment to moment adjudications that you can do. What I like a lot when I'm trying to think of a way to pressure the players, right? You want tension, is to have alternative goals in the scene that aren't just kill everybody in the room, some sort of
yeah,
objective and a hazard in the room, so that players failing at various things could make the scene harder for them without actually dealing damage. It can complicate things, or NPCs that are with them, or trying to break the door open actually just seals it more because a secondary gate just came down, and now you're gonna have to find a different way around. You can play with that, and especially if the monsters or threats in the scene have their own goal that isn't just kill the players.
yeah.
You know,
Stakes outside of violence.
exactly, stakes outside of violence. Like
You know,
bandits. Bandits don't have to be murderers.
right?
They could just be thieves. And really, what does a bandit want? A bandit wants to survive, right? They're not interested in slugging it out with some demigod slaying heroes. Like they want to have an unfair fight. They want to get you to drop your goods and then leave. They
I,
don't want
I
to
always
cross
think of the
swords.
I always think of that Skyrim meme where it's like all the regular bandits and they're like, "Hey, that guy over there that just killed a dragon, let's attack him."
Yeah, that's the guy. Today's going to be the day. So
Uh,
yeah, so I like when, the players. An example, I like running river crossings. I think crossing a river is
mm,
a really fun,
yeah.
scene for basically any setting. So players
Oh
are
yeah.
crossing a
Great
river.
travel scenes.
Yeah, yeah. So players are trying to cross a river. Some complication happens. You do some skill rolls, right? To get across the river safely. Maybe there's a little something there, and that's when the bandits ambush you. But they're not.
Right.
They don't pop out and start shooting their bows or in my game firearms. They threaten you and say, "Just give us the gold and you can go."
Yep.
And then the social characters have a chance to ply their trade a little bit. Maybe that goes south and maybe it does come to blows. But the bandits don't need to kill people. Maybe if they just steal the player's horses and run, they'd call it a success. And get away with their lives, right? That kind of thing is a new, nobody actually there. Their goal isn't kill everybody. The players are get across the river and keep going, and the bandits are get paid. And so maybe it does end in a bloodbath, as these kind of games often do. But at least then people have some opportunities to try something a little different, and you can create different pressures that way.
Yeah, for sure. I just actually, to go back to that example, when the players in my game encountered that sort of proto-human, right?
Yeah.
Um, one of the things that ended up happening was the bard. He went up to him and he started singing a song, and he was like, "I try all these different languages," and so I had it kind of planned to just be like, this is a character that you can fight because they don't really have like language yet, that sort of
Mm-hmm.
thing. But in the moment, the way the scene played out and everything, I was like, well, I don't want to like rob the choice of like a stake outside of violence, like we're talking about,
Mm.
So I said, as you shift through your languages, one of them was reptilian. So I just kind of decided in that moment that, sorry if this spoils something if anyone's listening later, but um, one of the tribes on this island are these lizard folk. And so maybe the lizard folk had taken this tribe of these proto-humans sort of under their wing and taught them some words. So as he was switching languages and he says, I tried the reptilian one. I said, like, there's a connection that is established almost in the way that like someone who speaks Spanish might understand some Latin,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
sort of thing.
German and
And
English would work too.
yeah, exactly. Those root languages. And so it ended up becoming this, long story short, this whole encounter and like all the stakes were very narrative. Like they were kind of worried about, he led them back to this cave. He said, like, this is where we keep the great fire lit, and they're
Yeah.
like, you are people who understand the secret of fire, basically, in very like broken words of this
Yeah.
reptilian language. But so they put so much pressure on themselves, as I just kind of like vaguely described things. It was really interesting. All the stakes became about like, oh, you know what? They seem to be worshiping these like lizard folk and this giant crab that they saw, basically. And so they were like worried, like, oh, we don't have any of the crab shell like on us or whatever from killing the
Right.
crab. And like, everything was outside of violence. They were just like, we don't want to offend this tribe that we just met in this strange land we're now in. And it became an infinitely more interesting encounter by just not introducing an element of violence immediately,
Absolutely.
basically.
Well, and, I'm the kind of GM and player. I like combat a lot, actually. Like, I really
Yeah.
enjoy fights in games, but I also think that even something that you're framing as a fight or a potential fight doesn't have to be line up. Well, line up my minis, you line up the bad guys, and then we just smash them together, right?
Right.
Because most is a crazy thing to say. Most living things want to live.
Yeah,
Most
right.
living things they're willing to
Believe
maybe
it or not.
fight to survive, sure, but people want to live, like, and
Yeah.
animals want to live. Pretty much everything is concerned with its own well-being outside of obviously supernatural things like a zombie or something.
Sure, right. Yeah.
But
Someone that's more motivated by a base instinct.
yeah, like, zombies are almost automata at that point, right? They
Right.
just walk
Yep.
toward something with flesh and eat it.
Yeah.
um, but even something like, demons and devils, they want to preserve themselves to continue on with their evil machinations.
Right.
So, allowing scenes to develop a little bit more organically where the antagonists have a goal that they want in mind that is maybe in conflict with the players, you can still have that come to blows, but there's room to explore there with the social characters or, what have you, people who don't sometimes get the spotlight on them in the bloodbath. And that's
Yeah.
even with, violence going on maybe in the scene, you can still have, the antagonists surrender actually when they just get to half HP. Be like, whoa, we want to live. We are clearly losing this.
Yeah. That's kind of like the old school morale check, right? I
Right.
think that's
Yeah.
what it's called.
Yeah.
You know,
I'm always
that
amused. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say that brings me to an idea, which this might take some thinking, but maybe either in your game or like a game that you've seen recently, or have there been any like really interesting or cool mechanics that revolve around this idea of like stakes outside of violence, or like even objectives other than HP, kind of like we were talking about earlier, but just like ways to sort of obfuscate stakes and pressure that aren't just centered around like bashing someone's HP down.
That's a good question. The way I'm presenting it in my game is that you almost shouldn't have just straight up brawls, mainly because the game is so deadly. The,
Mm-hmm.
the the players will lose that attrition if you just throw monsters at them.
Yeah.
It's much too it's too violent a game to have a normal square up fight actually work. It's not the intended thing. Some of the monsters, if they get the drop on the players, will tear them limb from limb like
Yeah.
immediately, because the intention is they're meant to be more like something to threaten you with, right? That creature is coming, we better get out of here in time.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
you can fight back against it, but it may not be the goal. I liken it to the one of the peak cinema films here, Aliens. So
Yeah.
these space marines that they bring down on that mining colony, they are pretty badass, and they're pretty gung ho about it, but they can be overwhelmed. And
Mm.
so, yeah, they do some shooting with their guns, but then it quickly enters into problem solving mode, right? Rather than just a straight up fight. So games
Yeah.
that make the way I phrased it, in the rules is the goal is survival, not victory. And so
Yeah.
that
That's good.
immediately reframes for the more narrow use case I'm doing, which is, a horror type game. But I think if games really emphasize that point, it can help. Like there was I think it's on Kickstarter right now. It was called something Mundi. It's a game that has no combat in it. It is purely
Mm.
exploration and interaction pillars. There's literally no rules for combat, but you explore a wild and dangerous world. But from an ecological standpoint, you're there to map things and find interesting creatures to like document and problem solve, but there's actually no fighting in it. And I just think
Mm.
that's really like an interesting, different approach. Like it's rare to see that these days. But I don't necessarily
Yeah,
have a concrete example of one that has. Well, I mean, something like Mothership builds in the guidance in its GM section really effectively, right? That you know, violence isn't necessarily the answer to survive a session of Mothership, right? You need to shut off the reactor and vent the coolant or something to survive this session.
yeah. No, yeah, and kind of what you're talking about, that lethality, and almost like an avoidance, or like a different mindset and approach to violence. It does, like, so I haven't been in the old school scene for that long, to be honest. Like, I cut my teeth on Pathfinder and D&D
Yeah.
5e. So, whenever I started to look at these kind of old school games, I sort of understood that when you approach a battle, you really want to be approaching it from a point of advantage. Like you need to
Mm.
really have the upper hand, or like, I was clicking through to find Mouse Ritter because I remembered there's like a saying in the best practices, and it says, "Dice are dangerous. Clever plans don't need to roll.
Oh,
Like
that's
fight
really
dirty,
nice.
run, die." you know,
That's great.
uh, yeah, it's just this idea that like once you have to introduce an element of chaos, you've already sort of like
Hmm.
made a mistake isn't the right word, but like you've already set yourself up for
Yeah,
failure almost.
danger,
Like,
failure, consequences. Yeah,
yes.
yeah. When
And I just like that sort of incentive that, like, these games we're talking about, like Mothership,
mm,
Alien, things like that, where like really you don't want to have to fight that alien head on. Like that is probably the worst case scenario that's going to happen.
right,
You want to set the trap and lie in wait.
exactly. And when you make a game deadly and it's very transparent that the game is deadly, or the way I kind of phrase it actually for my game is it's not that it's really easy to die, but it's really easy to get hurt, like
Mm,
hurt in substantive ways. If that's very transparent and in the DNA of the game, the players don't want to run in and trade blows with the creature, right? They want to problem solve around it. And I find that games where the players are very heroically powerful, once you get into upper tier 2 and tier 3 of D&D 5e, for example, you're like, yeah, sure, we'll go tangle with this dragon. I got
yep.
150 HP and a bag full of superior healing potions. Let's go.
And a wand of wonder
Yeah,
in my
it's
pocket.
then violence has less meaning because the consequences don't really there's not many consequences. A great example of this. I mean, I still enjoy D&D. Don't get me wrong, but I'm in a
Yeah, I was
session.
gonna say, like,
Yeah,
you said earlier, like, it is fun to play that strategic game too.
yeah,
Like, it's fun to like get in there and do your wombo combo that
yeah.
you built your character around and all that. But if that's the only answer to every problem, if all you know, if you're a hammer and all you see is nails, that gets kind of old after a while, right?
Yeah, and that's why I like to play D&D with my D&D group because I've been playing with these guys for 15 years now. But I don't when it's my turn to sit at the GM seat, I usually try to convince them to let me run something else. Because like we were in a
Yeah.
session where we were fighting 200 feet up, I think it was. Something a huge tower. And the ranger gets picked up by a gargoyle and dropped. And he
Oof.
falls and he took 35 points of damage or something like that. Some big chunk, and he just stood up. He's like, I'm all right. I thought, oh,
Uh,
come on.
how deflating of
Yeah,
a really like I don't know intense
right. And I was
moment,
like,
you know?
oh man. But no, he was like, I'm okay, guys. Just come pick me up with our pet griffin in a couple turns or something if you can. Something really, that undid all of that. And we quaffed a few potions or took a short rest, and he was fine. And so
Yeah,
it
man,
loses a lot.
that's a perfect example of like really that rule should just not exist. There should be like in real life, if you fall, I think you said this last night, like 15, 20 feet,
Right.
you're probably gonna die, like or at least have lasting injuries that,
Yeah, it's something that
minimum.
I like when consequences in a game, whatever the source of it is, whether that's a monster's attack roll, a failed skill check, something, creates a new problem for the players to solve together in some way,
Right.
right? And when so many things can be shrugged off in a game, it's sometimes harder from the rules themselves to create those consequences. You can still do so
Yeah.
with, good DMing skills and all that. But I like when yeah, you were tuning in last night when I was talking shop with some folks in my Discord where just one player in the group getting their leg bitten by a zombie in a scene with zombies is suddenly a very real problem you need to address. They can't walk
Yeah.
as fast. They can't outrun the zombies now. They're bleeding out. What do the players do to solve that? That's cool. There's consequence now. The way I like to phrase it is every round the game should change.
Mm.
If you're repeating what you did last turn, okay, I attack him again twice, and then I end my turn. If nothing's changed, then I think the fight itself has not been set up correctly. If you're on autopilot, right, round after round.
Right.
Um, I mean, my perfect rhythm is about 3 rounds. You or 3 to 4. You set up the fight. Initial stakes are established. In the second turn, things have started to swing in one or more directions. But the third turn, you introduce a complication that reframes the fight, and maybe you start back on turn one again, so to speak, and now there's a new challenge you need to address. And because I think people complain about long battles in some games because those battles are uninteresting, turn by turn.
Yeah, the stakes don't ever get
Right,
raised.
yeah.
Nothing really changes. It's actually just like a slow winding down as HP
Yeah,
diminishes
and you
usually.
kind of enter cleanup mode, right? Like, all right,
Yep.
most of them are dead. They've used all their special tricks. I happen to miss my last 2 attacks, so we're gonna have to go another round around the table because I didn't quite, do enough damage. And that can definitely happen when characters are very durable and abilities and attacks don't necessarily carry with them a packet of mechanical or narrative consequence.
You know, this actually kind of reminds me of a video I did. This was really early on, one of my earliest videos. I think it was called Goals in Combat. And let's see how good my memory is. Because I think the way I framed it was like a fight needs goals, which is, an acronym for geography, objectives, adversaries, limits, and
I
stakes.
like that
And
acronym.
thank you. And yeah, so the idea is that like if all it is like a bag of hit points between you and the door to get beyond them, then that's probably not a very interesting fight, right? But like
Yeah,
once you introduce elements of like geography, height, and things going on in the room, objectives outside of just murder, the
correct.
adversaries that have like either motives or like I don't know, interesting things going on. Like you can still role play in combat, right? Like you can
Yeah.
still have your characters, shout an insult or say like, "Hey, go go grab those hostages from the back of the room. We're getting out of here, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And then like, limits were like, I'm kind of rehashing the video at this point. Just go check out.
Go watch the video. You'll find him on
basically.
Elder Goblin Games on YouTube.
Yeah.
You're already there
But
if you're watching this, probably.
But the most important one is the last one, stakes. Like, if there are no stakes to that combat, like your characters and the players of those characters aren't going to be invested anymore.
Agreed.
Their eyes are gonna glaze over at some point. They're gonna go, all right, can we just like finish this up and knock out this last goblin? And
it's like it's getting late. I'm finding our D&D sessions end earlier and earlier in the night sometimes as we age. Well, it's like, the stakes is a really good point, because stakes also means that there's something to be gained or lost.
Right.
There's results to the fight itself. And, for those listening right now, stakes is not, I want to get to the door at the other side of this room in this dungeon. That's the stakes. That's not stakes. That's
stakes,
a speed
stakes
bump.
is your stakes is your character's best friend and your character's mom hanging over a pit of lava and having to choose between
Exactly.
the
two. There's something to be lost and gained apart from the hour you're going to spend in a handful of hit points, right? That's not so much stakes. And you can have conflicting stakes, like you just said, Jordan, things that you have to choose between. Or, just take the progress clocks from Blades in the Dark and slap them in any other role-playing game.
Oh,
just slap them in there, because it shows players stakes immediately. You start checking down, what was it? Your best friend's mom is about to fall into the pit. You just start, you draw a little circle, you label it best friend's mom falls to her death, and you start filling in pie slices, and they will feel that.
It's so funny that this example came up, because in the last, I think the episode that'll release right before this one with Ryan, we literally brought up the Batman Returns. I can't remember which Batman. Dark Knight, where Batman has to choose between saving Rachel and saving Harvey Dent. And it's just funny. We even use clocks as the example, I think. So
it's just shows everywhere.
It just shows how great of a mechanic it is. Basically, here's the pitch. Go, read Blades in the Dark, because this is going to be, a great tactile, that's not the word, actionable way to implement stakes outside of violence, right?
Absolutely. And like you said, though, NPCs, I love adding lots of NPCs to a game, because they are pressure points to be pushed upon. Like a favorite example I did when I ran a live session of my game just a week or two ago on Avenue Studios, and I did a river crossing, because it's nice and straightforward.
Shout out to Avenue Studios.
Yeah, shout out to Avenue Studios. Really nice people. The players were part of a caravan crossing a river. And midway through the river, and the river had been dammed, so it was nice and low, one of the wagons teeters over, getting stuck in a rut, and pins one of the travelers in the river. And it's the doctor for the caravan. Oh, no.
Yeah, I came in on the very end of that stream.
Yeah, so the doctor is pinned. He's okay. Maybe his leg's a little broken, but the river was dammed, so it's okay. He's not drowning or anything. So the players all start, okay, let's help get him up. Get a piece of wood, get a crowbar. We'll start trying to get him up. So they do that for one turn. And then they hear an explosion, and the dam being blown up by bandits, and the river starts to fill up. Now they have a time pressure. This NPC will drown if they don't get him free, and bandits are asking them to leave their supplies behind and go back to town and to rob them. And so they now have multiple things they need to juggle. And a lot of players that I've run that scene with, they actually talk the bandits down sometimes, right? You don't have to fight them. Maybe you could bribe them. But then one more round later, monsters show up and attack everybody. And now it is no longer, can we beat the bandits or not? It's, can we even escape this ravine alive?
Right. You do like your river scenes.
I love river scenes. It's a very real, risky thing throughout history, and why bridges were so important. And people died all the time trying to cross rivers, so I just like it a lot. I'm a big fan.
I've seen so many old westerns where somebody has to pull their horse through the river, and it's always fraught with peril.
Yeah, rivers and like swamps. Artax can get caught in the swamp of despair. All that stuff's really dramatic.
This is really making me want to play one of your Tales from Elsewhere games.
I love it.
It's such a ripe setting for those kinds of like stakes and stuff. Taking a wagon through the bayou kind of a thing. And
it's going to be fun. Well, and I'm going to try to do one of those 5-room dungeons. And but it's going to be horror and western. and it should be pretty interesting. I'm hoping it's cool. I don't usually approach dungeons using that method because when you're doing a horror game, the goals are a little different. The players are often not the aggressors, and so I've not usually approached it that way. But it's a really fun challenge.
Cool. Well, you know what? I just looked at the clock. We're coming up on our time here.
It blew right by.
Yeah, it really did. I mean, I could just keep talking about this.
Yeah, it'd be easy to fill a 3-hour podcast of just talking about this stuff.
That's what I love about this podcast. So far, it's just been so much fun to just chat with people, and really, I've like been hesitant to wrap things up because we'll get like in a flow and just great conversations. But hopefully, everyone who's been listening has enjoyed this. And Peter, well, I'll just say it's been awesome to have you. We'll definitely have to have you back again here on the Quantum Ogre Cast.
I would love that. Yeah, whenever you need another guest to rotate back in, anytime.
Absolutely. And I'm right there with you. I'm like designing my own TTRPG, so it's like always in my head, and I'm always thinking of like ways it applies to whatever conversation is going on. But I love hearing about your game. I actually am really excited for this one. I've been looking for like a good kind of Weird West game, so I'm excited to see it rise.
I am glad to hear that. And if you ever are running sessions of your game, if you ever play testing, I am first in line.
Yeah, I'm still, as you said earlier, I'm still in that like Google Doc phase.
Ain't nothing wrong with that.
It's got some play tests before it gets to the public.
Yeah, but, and I'll always say what I recommend to you and anybody else who may be working on their own game: test early, test often. If I could only give one piece of advice, it's that.
Well, this has been a conversation about stakes. And speaking of stakes, here on the Quantum Ogre Cast, you will run into the stakes no matter what choices you make. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Running through a dungeon, you come across the junction. You gotta go left or right. It doesn't matter what you choose, 'cause either way you lose. There's a quantum ogre just out of sight. And now it's coming to a head, the very thing you dread. You get ready for the coming fight. Your spells are waning fast, you hit them with your blast. It's the last flickering light. Quantum Ogre Cast, Quantum Ogre Cast, Quantum Ogre Cast, Quantum Ogre Cast.